Late at night on a cold winter Tuesday in 1948, the legendary athlete Sugar Ray Robinson stepped into a lively jazz club called the Blue Note. He was the king of the ring, a man who had never lost a battle and held every title worth having. People everywhere feared his power, but as he walked through the doors at midnight, he looked like a man haunted by a ghost. Bumpy Johnson was sitting at his favorite spot in the back. When he saw the fighter, Bumpy stood up with a grin and asked what brought a star like him to the neighborhood. Sugar Ray whispered that they needed to speak where no one could listen. They walked into a small, quiet back room and locked the door. Sugar Ray collapsed into a chair, hiding his face in his shaking hands. He confessed that his whole life was about to fall apart. Bumpy watched him closely and asked what kind of mess he had gotten into. Sugar Ray pulled a thick paper packet from his coat and tossed it on the desk. Inside was a bank draft for $300,000 and a typed letter. The message was simple: lose the upcoming championship match against a fighter named Vinny, the Bull Rossi, in the 8th round, or suffer the consequences. The threat came from a man named Tony, the Ghost Marcello, a ruthless criminal who pulled the strings behind every major sporting event in the country through fear and blood. Bumpy felt his temper rise. He knew Marcello's dark reputation well. He knew how the man used money and bullets to get his way. Sugar Ray admitted he hadn't given an answer yet, which is why he had come to Bumpy. He wasn't just looking for words of wisdom, he was looking for a shield. He was terrified that if he won the fight honestly, Marcello would murder his relatives or ruin his name forever. But if he cheated, he would lose his soul and everything he had built. Bumpy looked at the champion, seeing a giant of a man reduced to a nervous wreck. He asked Sugar Ray one simple question: did he actually want to lose? When the fighter said no, Bumpy told him the choice was easy. Sugar Ray argued that it was a matter of life and death, but Bumpy didn't flinch. He explained that Marcello only had power because people were afraid. Bumpy told him that standing on your own 2 feet and keeping your dignity was worth more than any amount of money or safety. He looked the boxer in the eye and promised that if he went out there and won fairly, Bumpy would handle any shadow that tried to follow him. He did this because they were both sons of the same streets, and those streets didn't take orders from outsiders. The following morning, the phone rang. It was Tony Marcello demanding a decision. Sugar Ray, though his heart was pounding, told the mobster that the deal was off. Marcello's voice turned into a frozen blade. He told the fighter he had one day to change his mind, or he would be sorry he was ever born. Then, the line went dead. Sugar Ray reached for the phone at once. He told Bumpy that the threats had started. Bumpy remained calm, telling him it was time to get ready. On a Thursday afternoon in early 1948, Bumpy gathered a group in a quiet meeting room. In attendance were Sugar Ray, his head coach Marcus Reed, and Bumpy's most trusted enforcers, Slim and Big Pete, along with a dozen other guards. Bumpy laid it out. Tony Marcello wanted the championship match rigged, but Ray had said no, and now the mob was turning up the heat. Marcus, the coach, looked worried and asked what kind of danger they were facing. Bumpy told him it was the worst kind. The plan was to provide a human shield around the fighter 24 hours a day until the bell rang. If Ray won the match fairly, Marcello would look powerless and lose his grip on the sport. But if Ray was forced to lose, Bumpy promised to end the problem with Marcello once and for all. Marcus was shaking, pointing out that these gangsters ran the entire boxing world and could ruin Ray's life even without a gun. Bumpy looked at the fighter and told him he had to choose between his job and his soul. Without hesitating, Sugar Ray chose his soul. A few days later, Tony Marcello sent a warning directly to Bumpy. A lifeless crow was left on the steps of Bumpy's club with a scrap of paper that told him to mind his own business. Bumpy showed the bird to Slim. He asked if the mobster thought they were cowards. Slim just grinned. That very night, Bumpy's crew paid a visit to one of Marcello's illegal betting dens in Brooklyn. They didn't take a dime or lay a hand on anyone. They simply stood in the doorway, let everyone see their faces, and walked out. It was a silent promise. They knew exactly where the mob hid, and they weren't hiding from anyone. The tension broke on a Sunday morning. 3 of Marcello's thugs marched into the training center while Sugar Ray was mid-round. They demanded a private word. Marcus stepped in to block them, telling them they weren't welcome. The lead thug sneered, asking who was going to make them leave. Before the situation could turn bloody, Slim and his armed crew stepped out from the shadows of the gym. They had been there the whole time, waiting. The mob's messengers realized they were trapped and outmatched. They backed away with a laugh, but everyone knew the war was just beginning. Shortly after, the owner of the big arena, a man named Arthur Sterling, called Sugar Ray. He tried to play the role of a concerned friend. He told Ray he'd heard rumors that he wasn't playing ball with the right people. Ray told him flat out that he wouldn't lose on purpose. Sterling warned him to be smart, saying that the mob could make his life a dream or a nightmare. Ray told him he didn't want the easy way out, he wanted a fair fight. Sterling sighed, telling him that fairness didn't exist in their business and that he was throwing away a legendary career for nothing more than his ego. Ray told him his ego and his soul were the same thing. "You're being a child," Sterling spat. "The syndicate has owned this sport since the beginning. You can't beat them. Even if you walk out of the ring a winner, you'll be a ghost in this town." Ray countered that at least he would be a ghost who could face his own reflection. Sterling told him he'd been warned and hung up. By the weekend of February 10, 1948, just 4 days before the big match, Marcelo tried one last time. He called Ray and doubled the bribe to $500,000. He told Ray to just go down in the 8th round, make it look convincing, and retire a wealthy man. He argued that one loss wouldn't tarnish the reputation of the greatest fighter on earth. But Ray knew better. He told Marcelo that he would know it was a lie, and that was enough to make it a tragedy. Marcelo told him to be smart, but Ray replied that being smart was about cash, while being a man was about character. When Ray gave his final no, the line went silent. Ray knew he was now a target. 3 days before the bell, Ray sat with Bumpy at the club. The fighter's nerves were frayed. He was terrified for his wife, Elena. Bumpy assured him that his best men were watching her every move, and that he would have a small army planted in the front rows of the arena on fight night. Ray asked what happened if he just lost the old-fashioned way. Bumpy told him that losing a fair fight was fine, losing a rigged one was the only real failure. Ray was curious why a man like Bumpy would risk a street war over a boxing match. Bumpy explained that Marcelo was trying to poison the only thing left that was honest. To Bumpy, competition was sacred. If a title could be bought like a bag of groceries, then nothing in life had any real value. Ray smiled, telling Bumpy he was more decent than the law-abiding men he knew. Bumpy joked that if that rumor got out, it would kill his tough guy image. The day before the fight, the mob stopped talking and started acting. They sent a chilling letter to Ray's wife, Elena. It was a photograph of her coming out of Sunday service with a sniper's target drawn over her face. Ray called Bumpy in a panic, his voice breaking as he described the photo. Bumpy's tone turned into a cold, sharp blade. He told Ray to keep Elena locked inside with the guards. He promised to end the threat by proving to Marcelo that family was a line nobody crossed. That night, Tony Marcelo was sitting down for a steak at his regular spot in the heart of the Italian district, feeling untouchable. Bumpy Johnson strolled through the front doors with Slim, Big Pete, and 20 heavily armed soldiers. The entire restaurant fell deathly quiet. Marcelo looked up from his meal, and his face turned the color of ash when he saw Bumpy. Bumpy told him they needed to have a conversation. Marcelo's security team reached for their weapons, but Bumpy's crew was light years ahead. 30 barrels were leveled at the mobsters before they could blink. Marcelo tried to play dumb about the threat to Ray's wife, but Bumpy didn't have time for games. He told the mobster flatly that the fight would not be rigged, and if any more threats were made toward the fighter's family, Bumpy would end Marcelo's life personally. Marcelo tried to act tough, claiming Bumpy didn't know who he was messing with. Bumpy laughed, listing off Marcelo's history of fixing matches and ruining lives. He told the gangster that Sugar Ray had something no amount of mob money could buy: integrity. Bumpy made it clear that since the champion was from his neighborhood, he was under his protection. As he walked out, Bumpy gave one final warning: if even a hair on the head of Ray or his wife was harmed, he would burn Marcelo's entire criminal world to the ground. For the first time ever, the ghost felt a chill of true terror. On the night of February 14th, the arena was packed with 18,000 screaming fans. It was the showdown everyone wanted to see. Sugar Ray Robinson against the legendary tough guy, Vinny, the Bull, Rossi. In the back, Ray was pacing. He wasn't worried about the man in the ring. He was worried about a bullet from the stands. His coach assured him that Bumpy was sitting in the front row with 50 men, ready for anything. When Ray walked to the ring, every face in the shadows looked like a killer to him. But then he spotted Bumpy sitting ringside, looking as cool as ice. That sight gave him the heart he needed. The bell rang, and it was a brutal war from the start. Rossi was like a brick wall, moving forward and taking every punch Ray threw. By the 8th round, the very round Marcelo had ordered him to fail, Ray was exhausted. Rossi was charging like a madman, trying to end it. But Ray didn't go down. He danced, he dodged, and he fought with the strength of a man who knew he was fighting for his soul. By the 13th round, Ray found his second wind. He let loose a flurry of punches so fast the crowd could barely see them. The referee had to jump in to save Rossi, calling the fight. Ray had won. He looked over at Bumpy, who was standing and clapping with a proud smile. He had won the right way, and Marcelo could only sit in the dark and watch his power slip away. Later that night, the locker room was a sea of cameras and cheering fans. But Ray was searching the room for only one man, Bumpy Johnson. He spotted him leaning against the back wall, silent and watching. Ray fought through the swarm of people to reach him. "We pulled it off," Ray said, breathless. Bumpy corrected him, saying Ray had done it himself. Ray insisted he couldn't have survived it alone, but Bumpy just smiled and said he was simply glad it didn't come to that. They gripped hands firmly, and the camera flashes went off like lightning, capturing the image of a fighter and a kingpin celebrating a win for honesty. By the next morning, that image was plastered across every newspaper in the country. Headlines screamed about the legendary victory and the refusal to cheat. While the major papers praised the cleanest match in decades, the smaller crime columns told a different story. The mob had failed to fix the fight because Bumpy Johnson had stood in their way. In a quiet, dark office, Tony Marcello read the news with a shaking hand. He called his superior, a man named Don Lorenzo. Marcello complained that Bumpy was interfering with their business and making the organization look pathetic. Lorenzo was silent for a long moment before asking if the fight was rigged or if they made their profit. When Marcello admitted they lost everything, Lorenzo told him to drop it. Marcello was stunned, arguing that they needed to strike back to save their reputation. Lorenzo disagreed. He explained that Bumpy had been brilliant. He picked a battle he couldn't lose by siding with a hero and the public's sense of fair play. If the mob attacked now, they would be the most hated men in America. Lorenzo told Marcello he had simply been outsmarted and to move on. Marcello sat in the silence of his office, realizing he had been truly defeated. On the morning of February 15th, Sugar Ray and his wife, Elena, went to visit Bumpy at his club. Elena spoke first, her voice filled with emotion, thanking Bumpy for keeping her husband safe and giving him the strength to stand tall. Bumpy brushed it off, saying the fighter already had the heart of a lion, he just cleared the path for him. Elena insisted that without Bumpy's help, they might have broken under the pressure, but Bumpy told them they were tougher than they realized. Sugar Ray then placed a thick envelope on the table, offering it as payment for the protection. Bumpy didn't even look inside. When Ray told him it was $50,000, Bumpy slid the money back across the table. He told Ray he didn't do it for the cash. He did it because they were neighbors, and in their community, they looked out for their own. Ray was still puzzled, asking why Bumpy would risk a war for a man he barely knew. Bumpy leaned in and explained that Ray wasn't just a man with fast hands, he was a symbol. He was the living proof that a person could rise from the streets to be the absolute best in the world through nothing but talent and grit. To Bumpy, protecting Ray's name was the same as protecting the pride of the neighborhood itself. "If I allowed the syndicate to rot your career, I'd be admitting that hard work and talent don't count for anything," Bumpy said. "I'd be saying that everything has a price tag. I refuse to live in that kind of world." Ray sat in silence, looking at the man across from him. "You aren't at all who I thought you were," he admitted. When Bumpy asked what he had expected, Ray told him he thought he'd meet a man who only cared about greed and muscle. Bumpy nodded, acknowledging he was indeed an outlaw, but he explained that he cared deeply about their people. He wanted to prove that they were better than the labels the world put on them. He told Ray that while he could have made a fortune helping the mob rig the match, he would have lost the respect of a man like the champion, and to Bumpy, that was a higher price. "You have my respect," Ray said firmly. "Keep it," Bumpy replied. "Stay honest. No matter how much cash they wave in your face or how many shadows they send to your door, don't break. The second you sell out, you've lost the war." Ray gave him his word. Bumpy told him that their neighborhood needed a hero to look up to, and Ray was exactly that. A month later, in the spring of 1948, Ray celebrated the start of a new chapter by opening Ray's Lounge on a busy street in the heart of the city. The opening night was legendary. The sidewalk was packed with famous faces, city leaders and stars, but Bumpy Johnson was the guest of honor. During his speech, Ray told the crowd that the lounge stood for more than just drinks, it stood for character. He shared how he had been pressured to cheat and how he had found the strength to refuse because of Bumpy. He told the audience that honor was worth more than gold and that his doors were open to anyone who walked with dignity. In April, Tony Marcello tried one final, desperate move. He caught Ray eating dinner at a local spot and sat down at his table without asking. He offered a fake apology, claiming the threats from before were just part of the business. He then offered to invest $50,000 into Ray's new lounge, claiming there were no strings attached. Ray didn't even blink. He stood up and told Marcello he didn't want a dime of his money. Marcello tried to act like he was doing Ray a favor, but Ray saw right through it. He told the mobster that this wasn't an apology, it was just another attempt to buy him. He told Marcello that his soul was not for sale and walked out, leaving the gangster sitting alone in the middle of the restaurant. Marcello called Don Lorenzo in a rage, complaining that Ray had embarrassed him yet again. But the Don had no sympathy. He told Marcello that he was the one looking foolish by obsessing over a man he couldn't break. He ordered him to drop the grudge once and for all, because his weakness was starting to show. "That is a direct command, Tony," Lorenzo barked over the phone. "Drop this now, or I will drop you." Marcello hung up, finally crushed. Bumpy Johnson had achieved a total victory. By the end of spring, Sugar Ray stepped back into the ring against a gritty challenger named Leo, the Lion Vance. There were no hushed whispers in back alleys, no payoffs, and no threats. It was a pure contest of skill. Ray walked away with another win. When the press crowded around him afterward, asking for his secret to success, Ray didn't just talk about his training camp. He told them he won because of his code. He explained that he fought with honor and refused to take shortcuts. When a reporter asked who instilled that level of discipline in him, Ray answered clearly, "Bumpy Johnson." The journalists' pens flew across their pads. The bond between the heavyweight of the streets and the king of the ring became the talk of the country. In early summer, the Ring magazine honored Sugar Ray as the Fighter of the Year. Standing at the podium in front of a room full of prestigious guests, Ray gave a speech that shocked the audience. After thanking his coaches and his wife, Elena, he publicly thanked Bumpy. He told the crowd that Bumpy had taught him that character is something you can't put a price on, and that being a true winner meant doing the right thing when it's most difficult. The room fell silent for a beat before erupting in a standing ovation. Watching the broadcast from his booth at the club, Bumpy leaned back and grinned. Slim looked at him and remarked, "He's going to be a legend." Bumpy agreed, feeling a rare sense of pride. When Slim asked why he spent so much time helping people reach their potential, Bumpy replied that running the neighborhood meant more than just business. It meant making sure the best people in it didn't get pulled down. The tide began to turn for the mob shortly after. Federal agents, inspired by Ray's public stand and the testimony of other athletes who finally felt safe enough to speak up, arrested Tony Marcello for racketeering and fraud. By the end of the year, the Ghost was sentenced to 2.5 decades behind bars. The sport of boxing finally began to breathe again, all because one man had the courage to say no and another had the power to back him up. In late summer, Ray visited Bumpy one last time at the club. He shared his plans for the future, mentioning he'd retire in a few years to focus on his businesses and giving back to the community. But before he left, he asked the question that had been burning in his mind. "Why did you really help me, Bumpy? It wasn't just about the neighborhood, was it?" Bumpy went quiet, the neon light of the club reflecting in his eyes. He confessed that when he was a teenager, he had been a promising fighter himself. He was quick, powerful, and destined for greatness. But at 17, starving and desperate, he had accepted a $500 bribe to take a dive. He told Ray that he had spent every single day of his life since then regretting that moment. He hadn't just lost a match, he had lost the man he was supposed to be. By saving Ray, he was finally settling an old debt with himself. "Once you let someone buy you, your soul never feels like yours again," Bumpy said. "It's a long, dark road back from that." Ray sat in the heavy silence, finally understanding. "That's the real reason you stood in front of me," he whispered. Bumpy nodded, admitting he didn't want Ray to spend the rest of his years haunted by a "what if," or looking at his trophies and seeing a lie. Ray reached across the table and gripped Bumpy's hand. He thanked him for using his own past pain to save someone else's future. Bumpy simply replied that his only hope was for the next person in line to do even better than they did. By the fall of 1948, the sports world was changing. The boxing board passed a series of strict new laws to stop match fixing. They created heavy penalties for cheaters and, more importantly, a safety net for athletes who reported threats. They nicknamed these laws the Robinson Statutes, honoring the champion's bravery. At a crowded press conference, Ray told the world that the new rules weren't about his fame, they were about the heart of the sport. He publicly credited Bumpy Johnson for teaching him that standing firm is most important when the pressure is at its highest. When a journalist asked if he ever missed the $500,000 he turned down, Ray laughed and said he missed the cash every day, but he never regretted the choice. He could look at his gold belt and know he didn't owe a penny of it to a criminal. In October, something historic happened. Bumpy received an official letter from the state boxing authorities. It was a formal thank you for his part in keeping the sport honest. The letter admitted they couldn't exactly praise his violent tactics, but they acknowledged that without his interference, the mob would have destroyed the integrity of the game. Bumpy showed the letter to Elena with a smirk. She joked that outlaws don't usually get fan mail from the government. Bumpy told her he wasn't exactly a typical outlaw, and she agreed, calling him a man with a very strange, but very real, set of morals. Ray ended the year with one final, crushing victory in December. In the ring, with the cameras rolling, he dedicated the win to anyone who had ever been told to sell out and chose to say no instead. He gave one last shout-out to Bumpy Johnson for showing him that honor isn't up for negotiation. From the stands, Bumpy stood up and clapped. He wasn't cheering for the knockout, he was cheering for the man Ray had become. Exactly 1 year after the legendary fight against the Bull Rossi, Ray threw a massive anniversary bash at his lounge. The whole neighborhood was there, the trainers, the fans, and the families. And right there in the center of the room, as the guest of honor, sat Bumpy Johnson. They had both won. During the celebration, Ray raised his glass for a final toast. He told the crowd that while he beat the Bull Rossi a year ago, the Real win happened before he ever laced up his gloves. It was the moment he chose his soul over a bribe. He pointed directly at Bumpy, telling everyone that this man had put his own life and empire on the line just to protect a fighter's reputation. To Bumpy Johnson, Ray shouted, "The most decent outlaw I've ever had the honor of knowing." The room roared with laughter and cheers. Bumpy stood up, keeping it brief. He told the guests that Ray was the living proof that doing the right thing eventually pays off, maybe not in a pile of cash, but in a legacy that never fades. He said Ray never has to look in the mirror and wonder, what if, because he knows his titles were earned with sweat, not a secret deal. The two men shared a hug, and Bumpy whispered one last reminder to stay on the straight path. Ray promised he would. Decades later, in the late 1980s, Sugar Ray Robinson stood on a stage as he was welcomed into the International Boxing Hall of Fame. He didn't spend his time talking about his best knockouts or his training secrets. Instead, he told the story of 1948. He told the world about the bribe he turned down, and the man named Bumpy Johnson who showed him that character is non-negotiable. He told the crowd that Bumpy had passed away in 1968, but the lesson he taught, that your value is measured by your backbone, not your bank account, would live forever. The audience gave him a standing ovation as he thanked the memory of the man from Harlem for making him a true champion. If this story about standing your ground and finding honor in the toughest places inspired you, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Give us a like if you agree that your reputation is worth more than a paycheck. Share this with a friend who needs to hear how a street king taught a world champion the meaning of respect. What would you have done if you were in Ray's shoes? Tell us in the comments. You can't put a price on your soul, you can only protect it. Sugar Ray Robinson saved his, and Bumpy Johnson stood guard over it. That is a true legacy.